listening to Over the Oxer podcast with Tracey Cole for all things to do with the mind for equestrians.
Welcome to this week's Over the Oxer podcast. And I want to talk today about something, that you might already be doing, or that you can enhance the way that you do it and the time that you do it. And this is a de-stressing method. So let me set the scene. And some, if not all of you, will recognize this. I certainly recognize it in myself. So you've had a busy day. Not necessarily a bad day, but maybe you have just been end to end with work and thinking and changing tack and thinking on your feet, all that kind of thing. Or maybe it has been a bit stressful in terms of people or politics or, just the job itself and the amount that you've been doing. So you're a little bit buzzy, but you've decided to ride after work. And then, the journey to the yard may not be the easiest. Or if your yard is at home, maybe the journey home from work wasn't the easiest. There was a lot of traffic. It was frustrating. It took longer than you thought. And you get to the yard. And you're there. And you know that when you get to the yard, maybe you have got the arena booked or the school booked. And so you're on a countdown. As soon as you get there, you're on this countdown. So you have to get your grooming done, get the horse from the field, maybe not in that order. Maybe you have, you've got to get your saddle, you've got to get the girth done, you've got to do your bridle, you've got to warm up. So there's lots of things in your head once again. Not necessarily stressful things, but if you are on this kind of time concern, then it's not easy, is it? And all this rushing, all these to-do lists, and you're about to get into the saddle. And your horse will have noticed that tension ages ago before you ever get into the saddle, will have noticed your heart rate, will have noticed the fact that you're moving quite quickly, maybe just getting things together or tacking up. You've been doing things quite quickly because your mind is still on that to do and to go and to get it done quickly, and haven't got a lot of time. And so you're kind of riding with certainly a stress activated, even if the situation that you're now in with your horse isn't that stressful. And maybe there's a kind of defense mode activated as well. And so knowing that situation, then I want to think about now a solution. What I love about this solution is that in scientific tests, it outperformed listening to music. It outperformed going for a walk. It outperformed having a cup of tea and being very mindful. And it reduced stress by almost 70%. So this was done by the University of Sussex quite a while ago in 2009. And noticing that people often push through a stress, for instance, they just keep going, or that people often distract themselves by doing something else, such as going for a ride, then science actually backs a better way of de-stressing. So when we are in that busy state, it's quite difficult then to be in the state that would be optimal for riding. And, I'm not preaching here as a sage on the stage. I'm kind of sharing what I know in theory. I don't always do it in practice. I'm a work in progress. But the state of flow that would be ideal to be in, to communicate effectively with our horses, but also to communicate with our mind and with our environment and read the environment without looking for stressors and triggers, to simply be in the moment to have that wonderful link between what we are doing in the moment, what we need to do in the next second or two, and not be distracted by the environment, but be aware of what's going on. Should we need to change tack, come back to walk, come back to halt, or whatever it may be. So in riding, we often talk about that, don't we? We talk about being present. And believe it or not, one of the ways that we can clear our mind of the busyness, start to be more present, and start to get into flow is to use reading. Now, scientifically, reading has that effect of clearing our system. It's like removing all those cookies, and it removes that clutter, and it is a massive reset button. And you might think, reading? But I've been reading all day. I never stop reading. I'm reading emails. I'm reading messages. I'm reading things on the internet. I have to read for my job. I read forms. I read people's work. I read reports. But it's not that kind of reading. So let's have a little look at what we mean by that. So reading is the pleasurable side of reading, not the work side necessarily, unless you love your reading at your work. But that reading is a nervous system primer. So as you start to read, particularly if you read fiction and a story that you love, your heart rate starts to slow down. You'll notice reduced muscle tension. You start to mimic that soft eye focus. Not terribly well, we're not in the widest peripheral vision, like 180 degrees, but we are certainly better off than when we are looking at a phone, for instance. And also the phone, a tablet, a computer, very often is emitting blue light. And we're very often scrolling, which creates even harder or narrower focus. So reading a book or even your Kindle, because you're not scrolling as quickly, because there's sort of a rhythmical eye movement, doesn't matter if you're a quick reader or a slow reader, it's kind of rhythmical and it starts to calm you down. So reading fiction helps you to build empathy because you're starting to understand the characters. And this translates for riders that if you can inhabit a character's world in a book, you're much better able to inhabit your horse's world. You don't simply live in your own isolation. So the practical application of all of this, because you might think, well, I do read, I read for half an hour before I go to sleep, or I read on my lunch break. Well, don't wait for those times, or in addition to those times, think about riding before, or I should say reading before you ride. So my challenge is for you to keep a book, and it could be a different book to your bedtime book, or keep a book in your car or in your tack room. And so before you tack up, research tells us that we need 6 minutes of reading. So 6 minutes of sitting in your car or sitting on a hay bale and read. So you could even put the timer on your phone if you really want to do. But we're not time poor. We're just inefficient with time. So give yourself that time, at least 6 minutes. And whilst you're doing that, notice how your breathing is at the start. Notice how it is at the end. Notice where your shoulders are. Are they up around your ears? Notice where they are by the end. Notice the drop. And anything else that you might notice? You might notice that your brain has slowed down, that the busyness, that the endless to-do list has evaporated for a few moments. And after your 6 minutes, or more if you want to do more, go and get on your horse. So the takeaway is that, you don't need an hour of meditation. You don't need a glass of wine to relax. You just need a story and 6 minutes. So what I'm really, really curious about now is the books that you are reading. So what books, fiction in particular, but it could be non-fiction, are you really enjoying, so that we can share them? We can start to build up almost a virtual library of great books to read before we get on. So at the moment I'm reading, I think it's called Harp of Joy. It's an unusual book. It's set between the 1920s and 1930s in England and Egypt, and then several millennia ago in Egypt. And it's kind of like a semi-true story, that there was a lady in Egypt who was an English woman who was obsessed with Egypt from being a very young girl, and so obsessed that she would skip school and go to the British Museum and spend time with the mummies. And eventually, the story takes you through a winding path. She ends up in Egypt. And I'm at the point now where she's thinking that she has this really deep connection with Egypt, and it's almost like she's lived there before, like a past life, because she's able to tell the archaeologists where to dig, where certain rooms are, and plans and so on. And they're starting to be fairly amazed by the fact that she's always correct. Which is, it's a great story. It's a great story. So this lady actually did exist, and I've forgotten her name, Dorothy, and I can't remember her surname, but yeah, take a look at that one if you like Egypt. Yeah, so do tell me, what are your favourite books? Fiction mainly, but maybe non-fiction. Send me an email, drop them in the comments. I would love to know. It's always great to have a batch of books that you can order next on Amazon. Okay, that's all I have for now. Let's go and experiment. Take care, and I will see you again really soon.